We all know and love the pot cards, especially for beauty they've given us, such as
I summon Pot of Greed to draw 3 additional cards from my deck!
That's not what it does.
Roll my dice! That is what it does! Pot of Greed! Draw 3!
Typically, these are spell cards used to give yourself an advantage through their draw power. But some work in interesting ways. So, let's take a look at every pot in Yu-Gi-Oh! Starting off with a classic, it's Pot of Greed.
Then I'll activate my Pot of Greed! This lets me draw 2 cards!
After being banned in 2006 for its insane draw power, Pot of Greed has been locked away there ever since, and is the poster child for the pot cards. Pot of Greed is accompanied by 2 monster cards, who, due to their association with it, might as well be normal monsters, since Pot of Greed ain't making its way off that list. Spirit of the Pot of Greed is a weak-ass monster that allows a player to draw 1 bonus card whenever they activate Pot of Greed. And Avatar of the Pot is a little more interesting when taking into account its original art and the depiction of the pot's nether regions. As for its effect, this monster lets you send 1 Pot of Greed from your hand to the graveyard to draw 3 cards from your deck. And yup, somehow, someway, there is a boss monster, Pot of the Forbidden, which is a flip monster that's level 9. Yeah, don't ask me why. When it's flipped, you can draw 2 cards, return all spell and trap on the field to the hand, destroy all monsters your opponent controls, or look at your opponent's hand and shuffle 1 card into their deck. A very fearsome flip boss monster? I don't know. Now, off to the spells. First off, we have Pot of Acquisitiveness, a card that allows you to shuffle 3 banished monsters into the deck to draw 1 card? A 1-for-1 that requires there to be 3 banished cards? I suppose it could be worse. Pot of Avarice certainly shows how Acquisitiveness could be a bit better though, by having you shuffle 5 monsters in your grave into the deck to draw 2 cards. Yes, it's 5 instead of 3, but it's easier to get monsters into the graveyard, and you get to draw 2 cards, making it a lot better than a straight up 1-for-1. And it's back to the questionable ones with Pot of Benevolence. This card has you select 2 cards from either graveyard and shuffle them into their owner's deck. It would actually be kinda good if this was a quick play spell, letting you chain it to one of your opponent's cards in their graveyard. But without this, it's a clunky card that gets outshined by others who do the same thing, but just better. Okay, here we go. The best card not named Pot of Greed yet. Pot of Desires. A simple card that has you banish 10 cards from your deck to draw 2 cards. Sure, you're sacrificing 10 cards, but just think about those sweet 2 cards in your hand. Pot of Dichotomy really tries its best by having you shuffle 3 monsters with different types from the grave into the deck, allowing you to draw 2 cards. But you do lose your battle phase for the turn. So, while the idea of drawing 2 is nice, having 3 types in the graveyard and losing out on the battle phase makes Dichotomy a little tricky to use. Pot of Duality takes a different route, and I respect it for doing so. No crazy requirements, just excavate the top 3 cards of your deck and add 1 to your hand. Oh yeah, no special summoning the turn you activate this though. Pot of Extravagance is another pretty good card that only at the start of your main phase has you banish 3 or 6 random face down cards from your extra deck. And then, depending on how many you banished, you can draw 1 or 2 cards. Decks like Labyrinth that don't really need the extra deck space can take great advantage of this card, but ones that utilize the extra deck really can't take advantage, cause it would suck to have your important card banished and lose the game on the spot. Also, you can't draw any cards by card effects for the rest of the turn, but that ain't really too bad. Pot of Prosperity takes some of the downsides of Extrav into account by behaving similarly, allowing the player to choose 3 or 6 cards that they'd like to banish from the extra deck, and then excavating either 3 or 6 from their deck and adding 1 to your hand. Unfortunately, for the rest of the turn, the damage your opponent takes is halved, and, like Extrav, you cannot draw cards by card effects for the rest of the turn. Of course, pendulum monsters have to be special, so they get their own pot in Pot of Riches. This card has you shuffle 3 pendulum monsters into the deck from either your graveyard or face up from the extra deck to utilize the pendulum mechanic, and then you can draw 2 cards. But you cannot special summon the turn you activate this card, except by pendulum summoning. It's actually a pretty solid card in pendulums, I suppose, but literally has no use anywhere else. And to the final spell, one that I think definitely has an argument to be the best yet, Pot of Generosity. A card that allows you to return 2 cards from your hand to the deck, and then shuffling it. Yup, that's right, you go -3 on cards, and gain nothing, unless you really want to shuffle your deck. It's just beautiful. And that's all the pot cards that I was going for. There are others with pot in the name, or ones with jar and greed, and they are not what I meant. Anyway, let me know what your favorite pot card is. Mine will probably always be Pot of Greed, for the great laughs it can bring about. Have a great day, everyone.